Mike's dream of restoring his Navy patrol boat was shattered when Karen, the HOA president, slapped bright stickers on it, claiming it violated neighborhood rules. Her strict, overbearing authority made it clear she wasn't just targeting Mike's boat. She was wielding power to control everyone. But Mike found a crack in her perfect system, and with the right evidence, he turned the tables, taking on the HOA in court. You won't believe how this story ends, with Mike proving that one man's fight against injustice can bring the system to its knees. Part 1. Injustice Strikes. Mike Benson had spent the last few months pouring his heart and soul into restoring an old Navy patrol boat, a project that felt like a personal triumph after years of service. The boat had been abandoned, rusted, and forgotten, but now it gleamed with the promise of new life. He and his friends, all veterans of different branches, had been working day and night to fix it up. The plan was simple. They would sell it, make a good profit, and maybe take a trip together afterward, something they hadn't done in years. The boat was more than just a way to make money, though. It was a symbol. For Mike, it was a reminder of the brotherhood he had shared with his comrades. Every scrape of paint, every new engine part was a small victory, a moment of redemption after a lifetime of serving others. It had become his pride and joy, something to show the world that even after the military, you could build something worthwhile. But then came Karen. The day she moved in, Mike didn't think much of it. People came and went in the neighborhood all the time. It wasn't until Karen, the new president of the HOA, started showing up at neighborhood meetings with a list of rules, new rules, that things started to feel off. She was everywhere, her sharp eyes always scanning, assessing. If you had a lawn, it had better be the right shade of green. If you had a fence, it had better be 6 feet tall. Nothing escaped her gaze. And the boat? Well, that didn't escape her either. Mike hadn't expected her to take such an interest, but sure enough, Karen's first complaint came in the form of a letter. It was thick with bureaucratic language, one of those letters that felt like a threat, even when it didn't say anything outright. The boat violated HOA standards, it said. It was unsightly. It didn't belong. Mike tried to ignore it at first. After all, the boat was parked in his own driveway, a place where he had every right to keep it. But Karen wasn't one to back down easily. She'd started showing up at his door, demanding it be moved or painted a certain way. She didn't care about the history of the boat or the hours he had spent working on it. To her, it was just an eyesore, a disruption to the perfectly pristine neighborhood she was trying to maintain. And then, one afternoon, he arrived to see the boat covered in bright, garish stickers. They were large, official-looking, and screamed "Violation" in bold letters. Each sticker was a slap in the face, marking his pride and joy as something unworthy, something to be ashamed of. Mike stood there staring at the boat, feeling the knot in his stomach tighten. He had worked so hard for this, and now it felt like someone had come in and torn it all down in one swift, careless motion. His friends, who had helped him restore the boat, were just as shocked, their faces showing disbelief. This wasn't just about a boat anymore. This was about respect. About the feeling that no matter how hard you worked, there was always someone there ready to tell you it wasn't good enough. Mike's blood boiled, and for a moment, he stood frozen, trying to understand why this was happening. He had always followed the rules, always made sure his property was in line with the neighborhood standards. But this felt personal. He wasn't just fighting over a boat anymore. He was fighting for the right to have something meaningful in his life, something that wasn't dictated by someone who had no appreciation for what it took to make something from nothing. Mike was furious. The stickers on his boat weren't just an inconvenience. They were an insult. An insult to all the work he had put in, to the memories attached to it, and to the idea that someone, anyone, could tell him what was worthy of being in his own driveway. At first, Mike tried to reason with Karen. He invited her over, hoping a calm conversation would clear things up. Maybe if he explained the personal significance of the boat, she'd understand. But Karen's attitude was as cold as her reputation. She stood on his front porch, arms crossed, her eyes scanning his property like she was the judge of what was worthy of being there. She didn't care about his story or his struggles. She had one rule: no exceptions. "Mike," she said, her voice sharp, "your boat doesn't fit with the neighborhood aesthetic. It needs to go. You've been warned." He could feel the anger boiling up in his chest, but he kept his voice steady. "I've worked on that boat for months, Karen. It's not just junk. It's a piece of history. You can't just treat it like this." But Karen didn't soften. She was unmoved, her smile all but mocking. "The rules are the rules, Mike. If you don't comply, there will be consequences." When he left her standing on his porch, it hit him hard. This wasn't just about one boat. It wasn't even about his own small corner of the world. It was about power, about control. The HOA's rules weren't just arbitrary. They were a shield for people like Karen, who were more interested in shaping the neighborhood into their perfect image than respecting the lives and passions of those around them. Over the next few weeks, the fines started arriving. First, it was a small $100 fine for violating aesthetic standards. Then came another, and another. The threats ramped up too. If Mike didn't move the boat, the HOA would start towing it. They would involve lawyers. The more they piled on the fines, the more Mike's resolve hardened. This wasn't just about some paperwork or rules. This was about a system that used fear and conformity to push people around. They were trying to break him, make him back down. But Mike wasn't one to take that lightly. He knew he had to fight back. There was no other choice. Mike started collecting evidence. He took photos of the boat, showing how much work he'd put into it, the way it had been restored. He kept records of every letter, every fine, every phone call with the HOA. He made sure he had a paper trail, a way to prove that what they were doing wasn't just about rules. It was about something much darker. He reached out to his neighbors, the ones who weren't afraid to speak up. To his surprise, many of them were just as fed up with Karen's reign of control. Some of them had received complaints about their lawns, their fences, their trees. It didn't matter what you did. If Karen didn't like it, you were out of line. A few of them had been silenced by threats. Others, though, had been waiting for someone to stand up. Mike found himself not just fighting for his boat anymore, but for the community, for the right to live in a place where people weren't forced to conform to some distant ideal. It became clear this wasn't just about a boat. It was about a system of rules that weighed heavily on everyone, crushing the individuality of the people who lived there. Mike wasn't just facing an HOA president who didn't like his boat. He was fighting an oppressive system, and if he didn't stand up, it would only get worse for everyone else. And so, the fight began in earnest. Mike wasn't going to back down. He wasn't going to let Karen or anyone tell him what he could or couldn't keep on his own property. What started as a battle over a boat had turned into something much larger, and Mike was ready for whatever it would take to win. The letters kept coming, each one more threatening than the last. The HOA had ramped up their tactics, and their final blow was a staggering $450,000 fine. The amount felt like a punch to the gut. Mike stared at the figure on the paper, unable to believe it was real. The fines, the threats, it was all beginning to take a toll. Physically, mentally, emotionally. For days, Mike couldn't focus. His hands trembled as he signed documents, and he found himself staring blankly at his boat, the symbol of his fight, as if it were mocking him. The financial burden alone seemed impossible to overcome. $450,000. That wasn't just money. It was his life savings, his house, his future, all at risk because of a stubborn, petty battle over a boat. It seemed like an insurmountable mountain. For a moment, Mike considered walking away. What could he possibly do? The system was too powerful. Karen had her HOA army behind her, and they were relentless. The pressure of it all nearly broke him. He couldn't sleep. He couldn't eat. The weight of the fine crushed him, pushing him toward a decision that felt like the only way out. Give up. Maybe he'd sell the boat, pay the fine, and just move on. Maybe it wasn't worth it anymore. But then something shifted. Something deep within him clicked. He wasn't just fighting for a boat. He was fighting for something far bigger. His right to exist, to have a voice in his own community, to stand up against a system that tried to trample over the people it was supposed to serve. He couldn't back down. Not now. Not after everything he'd been through. Mike decided to go on the offensive. The next few weeks were a blur of research and strategy. He spent countless hours poring over HOA bylaws and legal documents. His eyes burned from reading page after page of technical language, but Mike was determined. As he dove deeper, something became clear. The HOA wasn't as untouchable as it seemed. The bylaws they had relied on weren't as solid as they appeared. There were loopholes, inconsistencies, even areas of ambiguity. Karen's approach, her iron grip on the neighborhood, wasn't as invincible as she thought. She had relied on her position, on the fear she could instill in people. But fear was a tool, not a weapon, and Mike had found a crack in her armor. In those long nights, Mike felt something begin to change inside him. The weight of the fine was still there. The fear of losing everything was still real, but now he had something to fight with. He wasn't just defending a boat anymore. He was challenging an entire system, one that had made too many people feel small, helpless, and voiceless. Mike didn't know how long this fight would last. He didn't know if he'd win or if it would cost him everything. But he knew this. He couldn't let the HOA dictate his life. This was bigger than money, bigger than the boat. It was about taking a stand against a system that didn't listen, didn't care, and was willing to destroy lives to maintain its control. He made the decision. He was going to take them to court. Mike's legal battle wasn't just about getting rid of the fine. It was a challenge to the power of the HOA itself. A battle to restore balance, to remind people that they didn't have to live in fear of someone's arbitrary rule. As the days passed and his legal strategy took shape, Mike could feel a shift. It was the feeling of power returning to his hands, the feeling of control. The mountain was still tall, the stakes were still high, but now Mike wasn't looking at it with dread. He was looking at it with defiance. He was no longer a man on the edge of giving up. He was a man determined to fight back. And that fight was just beginning. The courtroom buzzed with tension. Mike stood tall, his heart pounding in his chest as the judge called for the final decision. His legal battle, which had felt like a David versus Goliath struggle, was nearing its climax. Months of hard work, sleepless nights, and relentless research had led to this very moment. But it wasn't just about the boat anymore. It was about sending a message, proving that sometimes one person's fight could take down an entire system. The case had captured the attention of the local media. Mike, now backed by a sharp lawyer and an army of supporters, wasn't just some angry homeowner. He had become the face of defiance, the symbol of someone standing up for their rights, refusing to bow to unjust authority. The neighborhood, once divided by fear of Karen's power, began to rally around him. People who had quietly suffered under the HOA's thumb now saw the possibility of change. And then, the unthinkable happened. The judge ruled in Mike's favor. The $450,000 fine was not only dropped, but declared unjust. The HOA's actions were deemed oppressive and legally unfounded. They had overstepped their bounds, and now they would have to answer for it. But the victory didn't stop there. Mike wasn't just walking away with a legal win, he had won something far more valuable. The HOA was ordered to compensate him for the emotional distress their harassment had caused. It was a small victory in terms of money, but the true reward lay in the weight that had been lifted from Mike's shoulders. The boat was his again, free from the bureaucratic chokehold. He had regained his pride, his peace of mind, and his right to live without fear. And as for Karen, her reign of control crumbled under the pressure of public humiliation. The HOA's once iron grip on the neighborhood fractured. The community that had once feared her now stood up against the injustice she represented. The local news covered the story in full, highlighting the unfair tactics of the HOA and the ultimate triumph of an ordinary man who refused to back down. Karen, once a symbol of power and authority, became the face of arrogance and oppression. The headlines told the tale. Neighborhood HOA president humiliated in court. Local resident takes stand against unfair rules. It was a blow to her ego, but more importantly, it was a wake-up call for the entire community. Mike's victory didn't just restore his boat, it restored his belief in the system, in justice, and in his own ability to make a difference. He had faced an impossible battle, one that seemed unwinnable, and he had come out on top. It was a reminder to everyone who had been watching, silently rooting for him. Sometimes the fight is worth it. Sometimes standing up for what's right means risking everything. But when you win, you inspire others to do the same. As Mike looked at his boat, now free from the threat of the HOA's grip, he felt a rush of pride, not because of the boat itself, but because of what it symbolized: resilience, courage, and the power of one voice to change everything. He had fought for his right to live his life on his terms, and in the end, that's what truly mattered. Mike Benson's story was more than just a legal victory. It was a beacon of hope for anyone who ever felt powerless in the face of injustice. It reminded them that the system, no matter how intimidating, could be challenged. And if one person could make a stand, so could they.